Good morning. British Columbians take it as a natural fact of life that there is always oil at the gas stations, no shortage, always furnace oil for your home, always hydroelectric available at the turn of a switch, always natural gas. But whether we like it or whether we lump it, the man in the street is going to have to start to take an interest in what the policies are of our provincial and national governments. Last week I talked to Joe Clark about the oil policy, and the only firm fact I got from the Prime Minister of the country was that in the final analysis he would, if necessary, use his federal powers to impose an oil policy. We don't know what that oil policy is. Last weekend there was a fascinating interview with a man who was the Lands, Forest, Waters, Energy Minister in the W.A.C. Bennett government for many long years. The Honourable Ray Williston, who is now President and Chairman of the Board of the BC Cellulose Corporation. And Mr. Williston, my first question is a simple one. We take it as dogma in British Columbia, statements by federal cabinet ministers, statements by the environmental people, statements kind of all around the clock, the withdrawal of West Coast from their oil plan. We take it as dogma that it would be evil and sinful to have an oil port in British Columbia. Does that relate to our oil policy, and what do you tell me of that?
Well, Jack, I think everyone knows that British Columbia only produces about 25% of the oil that it happens to use. We in British Columbia have been dependent almost entirely on supplies from Alberta, but so have areas in the United States, and so have areas in eastern Canada. And Alberta supplies from ordinary wells is also depleting at the present time. Of course, they have potential in their oil sands, but that still has to be developed. And Canada as a whole has an increasing demand for oil products as we're moving along. So with British Columbia actually moving down, Alberta moving down, Ontario having a pipeline into Alberta, British Columbia sitting right on a seacoast, it just seems to me ordinary logic that if we're all going to get our oil in the future, we aren't all going to get our oil out of the province of Alberta, and we'd better start looking at suitable alternatives before it's too late.
Well, now, if we can't be guaranteed, well, first of all, how essential is and how soon should we have a national oil policy out of Clark's government? And what should that oil policy broadly try to do for this nation?
Well, we have to have an oil policy really for Canada as quickly as possible, because until there's a national policy, there can't really be a provincial policy, because since we do not have the oil supplies within Canada, we're hoping eventually, so they tell us, by 1990 or something, to become self-sufficient in oil in this country or in energy supplies. But until that time comes along, we're dealing internationally. And to deal internationally, the national government is the one that has to make the decisions. And if the national government does not have a national policy, there's no way the provincial governments can develop their policies within the framework of the national policy. So it's absolutely essential that we have a policy concerning this matter at the national level just as quickly as possible.
And also at the provincial level.
That's right. And the provincial level, of course, has to fit in with whatever comes at the national level, because if you have a provincial policy that isn't in accord with the national policy, you're in trouble. Now, one might say, well, how about Alberta and British Columbia? It's entirely different, because Alberta is within the country and can sell its product and do its dealing completely within the Canadian sphere, whereas British Columbia is a seaboard province, and anything we do offshore has to be with the cooperation and under the policies that are advocated by the national government.
But in your interview at the weekend in the province, give it a good plug because it was a good interview, you made it a very strong point that we must face the facts of life, and that there must, I think you said, be an oil port on the west coast, and that oil port must be in Kitimat. What would that oil be for? That oil surely would be for basic transportation of American supplies through the Midwest, if they come that way, and Carter hasn't made up his mind, it would seem, or we haven't made up our mind. Would that oil port at Kitimat be any good to us?
Well, Jack, that's the only one really that makes sense from an environmental standpoint and from a use standpoint. As I said before, to keep things in perspective, we only produce 25% of our oil now. We get the remaining amounts of that oil from the province, mostly from the province of Alberta. As the oil supplies tighten up and we have to have an assured supply of the future, then I think it's going to have to come offshore, and we're going to have to use any supplies of oil that we can get. Now, right at the present time, the Americans have a real problem, and I'm Scotch ancestry as some other people are, I know,
right.
And you like the other guy to pay for as much of what you have as is possible. And the Americans have a present problem of moving oil from Alaska to the northern tier states, and they're going to have to do it. We've been supplying those states in the past from Alberta. In the future, it's going to have to be supplied from Alaska. And if we can facilitate that and at the same time provide a vehicle by which we can get supplies for our refineries in the future, so much the better. Now, why Kitimat? Okay, you come across from Kitimat, you can come across in that Pacific natural gas line there without any further environmental damage. You've got an oil refinery at Prince George, you've got an oil refinery at Fort St. John, you've got an oil refinery at Kamloops. Unless we have some kind of a strategy and an oil policy, our declining supplies in British Columbia are going to phase out those 3 refineries and all the distribution that goes with them. If an oil line came across from Kitimat with the lines in place, you could supply them all, you could keep them up to date, you could do the job that's going there at the present time.
And you could also fuel the northern tier supplies to the United States.
Well, you'd come right across to Valemont, as I've suggested. At Valemont, there's an ideal place there to put a tank farm. There's a sand flat that would be absorptive if you had ever had any trouble with oil spills from a tank farm. But in any event, you're at the top of the grade there. You hit the Trans Mountain hits the interprovincial goes down into the northern tiers, and you do all of this. You do all of this without duplication and with present facilities that are in place and people who are working at the present time. If we don't use them, in the future they become redundant and useless, and I suppose, I don't know whether they'll pull them up or whether they'll let them rust in the ground. But in any event, we have the facility there to meet the requirement of the United States, as we have been meeting their requirements in the northern tier, and they've come to depend on us over all these years. That's why they're in trouble up there at the present time.
Well, let me get that quite clear, though. The oil port at Kitimat would serve a double function.
Yes.
One that would pick up the Alaskan oil from tankers from Valdez or thereabouts into Kitimat, right?
Yes, right.
It would prevent the big super tankers going down the west coast and through the Straits of Juan de Fuca.
Right.
And you tell me, too, and tell me if I'm wrong, that if we didn't get we'd get some of that American oil for our facility and giving them the line. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure whether we'd use that American oil or we'd have to get other oil brought in there. I'm suggesting really that maybe some China oil or Venezuela oil would come up for our needs, because we use sweet oil in British Columbia in our refineries, and this is so-called sour oil that comes from Alaska, and you have to have special adjustment to your refinery, or you have to mix it with the sweet oil before you can actually refine that oil in our refinery. So we couldn't use that oil directly ourselves, but we could pass it through. They could pay the costs, or much of the cost of the oil port. When they paid much of the cost of the oil port, we would have a facility in place to handle our oil supplies to meet our needs much more rationally than we have at the present time. As a matter of fact, in Canada, we haven't got an oil port on either the east or the west coast, if you can believe it. We've got an oil crisis, both east and west, and the oil comes in eastern Canada from Portland, Maine, and if we go through with the present lack of policy, ours will come through from Juan de Fuca in the United States up into Canada.
Hold your breath, Mr. Williston. I want to explore that further with you. Quite fascinating after this break.
Okay. Yeah, well, if you split it the other way, it would work. Yeah, okay. If he has a split
I'm going to
screen.
do 10 or 12 minutes with him if I have to, so don't worry about the break.
Okay, got that, eh? Jack, if you see the split screen like that, look towards him.
Which side will he be on?
Maybe on your right.
Well, no, like that. That's all right like that, because he just looks at the monitor. Look at the monitor, Jack. Just look at that monitor. No, he looks at the monitor.
I've got to look away from the monitor. Yeah, I've got to look away from the monitor.
Yeah, look at the split. Look.
From our studios in Czech and Victoria, I'm talking to Ray Williston, who spent a political lifetime handling energy in the W.A.C. Bennett cabinet and is now president and chairman of the board of the BC Cellulose Corporation. Mr. Williston, you impressed me greatly with a basic fact which somehow in all these years I've never known. Canada, this great nation, with all its total reserves and Athabascan tar sands and heavy oil and all the other fields, we don't have a major oil port on either coast to look after our own needs.
You can't unload a major tanker, or you can't provide, take off the oil from a major tanker on either coast. You can take individual amounts off for individual refineries in relatively small quantities, like in the middle of Burrard Inlet, or in the Maritimes. Irving's got some places there out in New Brunswick and St. John for his refinery that he can take a lot off small quantities of oil. But that isn't Canada. And if you're taking oil in for use in Canada, certainly most of our oil in Vancouver comes over that pipeline from Trans Mountain Pipeline from Alberta.
Right.
And it doesn't. No, we can't handle our oil needs, and we haven't got any facility in Canada on the East Coast or West Coast for getting it. And if somebody shut us off tomorrow morning and we got so uppity with the United States or anybody else that we said we were going to do this, that, and the other thing, you know, we'd be shut off so quickly it'd make your head swim.
That's a basic fact of national security, but therefore maybe you'll be prepared to give me your opinion now on the current dogma, especially on the West Coast, and I don't have to throw John Fraser's name at you. We had that kind of fruitless oil ports inquiry, which, as you pointed out, was more or less abandoned. Why do we believe and accept without question the dogma that any oil port has got to be evil in Canada?
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea.
Do you accept it?
No, I don't accept it, because since I've become interested in the matter over the last few years, I think I've investigated every major oil spill that's taken place practically any place in the world for its long-term lasting effects, both on the environment, fish life, and everything else. Now, no one wants an oil spill. That's stupid. But if one does come, if you follow it through for the long term, you'll find that the relatively long-term damage is not as bad as people would have us believe.
What about the Torrey Canyon? That was going to ruin the southwest coast of England.
That's right, but there has been no residual damage that they can find about that one at the present time. But worse than that, Jack, and go back to the war, people don't talk about this, and they won't even put it in headlines, but the Nazi U-boats got into the east coast of the United States. Very, very bad in 1941-42. And the biggest spills of oil we've ever had in history around the world were on the east coast of the United States. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology carried out a very, very serious study of the detrimental effects of those oil spills, and that study from the Massachusetts Institute is available. It took me 6 months to get it, but I've got it. And they can document no long-term, lasting, permanent damage that took place from the worst known oil spills that have ever taken place in the history of man. And that's
In other
right
words,
there.
more social inconvenience and dirt and filth, but no long-term killing effect.
That's absolutely true. Nobody's going to advocate you do that. I mean, the grimes on the beach, and the beaches were spoiled for a period of years, and so on. But the long term just wasn't there. And therefore, I'm saying, okay, if we're not going to take a chance in this life, as individuals, if we're not going to take a chance, we're not going to get up in the morning in the first place, or we're not going to walk across the street in the second, or we're not going to drive our car in the third, or we're not going to get in an airplane in the fourth.
But Mr. Williston, to be brutally frank, surely it's the politicians, and I'm not castigating any particular politician, who are so overwhelmed, as most of us are, by environments and threats from fish boats and whatnot, that nobody will look at making a decision in case they lose popular power for the next election, whenever that happens to be in whatever field. Is that one of our basic weaknesses as we look 50 years down the road?
That's absolutely right. People, there's always the finger to the wind to see which way the wind is blowing, and then you adjust your sails accordingly. And at the present time, all of the environmental information, all of the publicity goes out to create that image, and then the political leaders reflect the image that comes to them from the people who are supporting them at the polls. And my own view is that we've got to get this message some way across to the man on the street who starts that image going in the first place, reflects it in the paper, and comes back, and the people who actually really administer in the final analysis what they perceive to be the desires of the people that they happen to represent. And I want to tell you, when we run out of oil and gas and they're sitting around, somebody's going to say to the political leaders and others, you know, why didn't somebody do something about this? This is why I've finally decided to speak out now, because I thought Carter was going to make a decision last weekend, and I thought if I didn't say anything before he made the decision, somebody would say to you, you so-and-so, you weak-livered. Yeah. If you thought that, why didn't you say it before he made the decision? So I finally decided to do it. Now he's put it off for 60 days.
But
so.
the fact of the matter is, talking about Carter's decision, we had the big Canadian consortium, West Coast, a part of it, what's it called, Foothills.
Right.
Foothills. They seem to have the same plan to bring the Valdez oil overland all the way to the United States. And they backed out, they walked away from that. So what decision can Carter make when Canadian politicians say, stay away from Kitimat, stay away from Kitimat, use Skagway, stay away from Kitimat? What can Carter do but ship his oil down the west coast through the Straits of Juan de Fuca?
He can't do anything. And if he has to go to the northern tier, the cost of the northern tier and the market at the end of the line of the northern tier doesn't make any economic sense, and it's pretty easy to see why he's put it off for another 60 days. He just can't make it make any kind of sense in that particular locality. In the meantime, the oil, the 1,200,000 barrels a day, goes down the coast. It goes down the coast in tankers. It goes all the way down even to the Panama Canal. It's offloaded there outside into smaller tankers. It goes through the Panama Canal and goes around the other side. And everybody talks about the environment. You handle it in the water a further distance. You transhandle it in. You put it through the canal. You do all of these other kind of things. And at the same time, we say we're protecting the environment. Well, whose environment? We all live in this one world, and we'd better come out with a pretty sensible decision as to how this one world operates.
Our politicians, Mr. Williston, and you were one yourself, and you know the pressures of being re-elected. You know that. Now you're free to speak, which is perhaps a good thing. We only make these tough decisions in wartime. Is that not correct?
That's right. Well, when you have no other, you have to make a decision, you'll make a decision. And there's going to be a war here pretty soon. It's going to be an economic war. It's going to be a practical war in whether our people actually can move with lubricants and with heating oils and with energy supplies. You know, we keep talking in the future, we're going to do all these kind of things. But I want to tell you, and you know very well, and I've had experience in this, once you get the idea, it takes years and years and years before that idea is translated into a source of energy. And what's scaring me is we're still dealing with ideas and we're running out of the energy source.
One question on our national oil policy. Do you think that Carter has backed off and taken the 60-day hike on his decision, partly because he's still hopeful that Canada might give a lead as to be either willing to open Kitimat as a port or to bring the Alaskan oil down through a pipeline along the Alaska Highway, the safe way into the United States?
Jack, the other one, let's deal with the two of them. The first one won't happen. Coming down the Alaska Highway, if you can't make it economic to put it across the northern tier, it's absolutely impossible to make it economic to bring it down through the foothills and to come down. You take it out halfway across the Alyeska line, they've already got to amortize and pay that line that they've got in there now, so you'd not only have to pay the total cost of the new line, you'd have to still amortize the cost of the Alyeska line to Valdez at the present time. All the costs would be into Canada. It would have to be subsidized into Canada. If he's going to subsidize something into Canada, he's going to build it in the United States. I mean, that's the political reality.
And you're saying that as far as Kitimat concerned, apart from being helpful to the Americans and a fairly short transshipment route, it would be very helpful to us for sources other than American oil.
Oh, certainly, and it would open us up to world markets. We're not open to world markets at the present time. We can't trade with China. We can't take Chinese oil back here in trade for our wheat. We'll give them a credit for our wheat and send them our wheat. We could be bringing oil back from China to pay for our wheat, oil back to pay for our forestry supplies, and work that trade business going.
Mr. Williston, I'm going to keep you for one more short segment. I want to talk to you about the pressures within the country, especially in relation to Ontario and Alberta and BC. Ray Williston, after the break. I want to finish with a couple of basic points to Ray Williston, president of the BC Cellulose Corporation. You all know he's passed as a cabinet minister in British Columbia for how long? 20 years, Mr. Williston?
Well, about a little less than that, but not
20 years. You don't look a day more than 50.
Well, you know, I used to say I was in Monique Began's payroll, and somebody said they didn't realize I joined the federal government, so I stopped those smart kind of decisions.
That's right. Well, I'm not on Monique Began's payroll yet, so I've got a couple of years on you anyway, Mr. Williston. But a couple of very basic points. One, Kitimat is the only safe, sensible place for Canada to establish an oil port, which it must have for the importation of oil, because we are not self-sufficient. Is that basic fact?
That's basic fact, and it's also, even if we got it from the Middle East, it's still the shortest distance from the Middle East to central Canada.
It's through Kitimat.
That's right.
But that gorgeous, I could have us all in tears about that beautiful port in which you said it would be, somebody told you it would be safe to run 3 super tankers up there line abreast.
That's right.
That's the most gorgeous Douglas Channel in the world. How dare we take any tankers into that beautiful place, merely because the lights are going out across the nation?
Well, maybe, but if you can't run a tanker up that, which the average width of that channel compared to where they're running tankers and other things around the world, then our level of competence and our navigators and our pilots and so on are at a level which I think they're higher than that, and I think we could enforce the requirements, the quality of the boats going up that inland waterway so that none of these junkers got in there to damage us in the future. But those are some of the decisions that have to be made. If you decide you're going to protect that waterway, you'd better protect it, and I think it should be. But there isn't a major fishery at the end of it. There's a good recreational fishery at Kitimat, everyone knows that, but there isn't a major commercial fishery like the Nass, the Fraser, and the Skeena, and so on.
Next question. Here we've got Alberta, which is so far the wealthiest, oil-rich province part of the country. Here we have Ontario, which is talking about the recession if oil prices are jacked up right away to world levels. Here we have the federal government. Where does BC stand in getting its continued supplies of oil from Alberta if we don't find any? What clout do we have to get it? What clout does Ontario have? And how do we apply this clout for a provincial policy?
Well, obviously, I think from a political standpoint, political realities being what they are and voting being what it is, that Ontario has a greater clout than we ever will have in the province of British Columbia. And if Joe Clark says he's going to enforce a national policy, he's going to enforce a national policy concerning the area from which they gain the greatest amount of support, and you can't overlook the province of Ontario. And when there's a real critical situation for oil, and we sit out here on the coast, and we're open to being able to deal with wherever oil might be able to come by ship, and it's going to move by ship, whether we like it or not, for many years to come. And if we're out here able to deal, and we don't deal, and Ontario is landlocked and can't deal and has to get everything in on pipeline either from Alberta or up through that Portland, Maine pipeline,
right,
then it's just obvious. Well, to me, it's just practical common sense of where we're going as Canadians, not only as British Columbians. We can do things, and why don't we do them? Why do we make it all the worse for the people in Ontario?
Can't we sit back and say, well, we've got 25% decreasing oil in British Columbia to meet our requirements, but we'll find more. I mean, we're a big province. We've found some oil. There's no reason why we can't find it. Can we sit back and hope for the future?
I don't think we can. If we could find it, we'd have found it, and we wouldn't be on the downhill grade right now. If they could have found it on the North Slope in Alaska, I think they would have found it, because they haven't found as much as they hoped. And that's one of the real problems with this oil line and other handling facilities, of making them too expensive. At the present time, it looks as though that supply will run out between 10 and 15 years, and you can't amortize a long-term facility with oil only for that period of time.
Is it not a fact, my final question to Mr. Williston, is it not a fact, though, that facing the political realities today, with a government in Ottawa which doesn't have major control yet, with a very tough man like Lougheed sitting there, grinding his teeth and saying, I will discuss, but I will not negotiate, is it not a fact that we've kind of lost the battle, and that your thought of a practical reality of an oil port at Kitimat has got to be 10, 15, 20 years away?
Well, if it is, we're in disaster. I can tell you that right now. If we head in the way we are and butt our heads together and not take practical action to resolve our problems for the future, then we're in trouble. And let's not kid ourselves. We're in a position where we could be moving. We're in a position Canada-wise, and I don't know why the federal government doesn't understand this. If we were in a position to be able to accept oil at the present time, world oil as it's coming in, we wouldn't all be sitting here at the moment completely at the mercy of a policy that's determined in the province of Alberta. We'd have alternatives. At the moment, we do not have alternatives, certainly in the West, because we haven't any way of handling the oil, even if it did come to us.
Final question. Can the provincial government be blamed for its lack of forthrightness on a Kitimat port, if they sought or followed your advice, and for its lack of clearly stating its energy policy other than conservation for the years ahead?
Well, I think that the federal government took the action because it controls port situations such as that. It had the inquiry. It was moving forward. I think anybody can criticize anybody else, and I think if we just sit around and spend our time criticizing at this time, we're not going to get anywhere. I think the realization has to come on behalf of the people of British Columbia that this is an absolute requirement, and they'd better get to it if they're going to protect their own interests in the world of tomorrow.
Good. I think people will remember one specific thing from this interview this morning, hopefully, apart from the fact that we only supply less than 25% of our own oil supply, is that the great favoured nation of Canada, astride this colossus of ours, doesn't have one bleeding oil port of consequence on either coast so that it can deal and trade in the world markets with and for oil.
No, we're supposed to be a major country.
Thank you, Ray Williston, President and Chairman of the Board of BC Cellulose Corporation. Thanks, Mr. Williston.
Thank you.
Webster, after the break.
The prospect of
Brian was out working yesterday and doing a piece on Matsqui, but before we jump into the Matsqui story, I think we should take a couple of minutes to cogitate on what Williston said. And I honestly raise my hand and hope to die if I should ever tell a lie. I did not realize before this morning that apart from minor offloading ports, all we have is a pipeline from Maine, where the tankers from the Middle East and Venezuela come into the east coast of Canada, feed it back up for Quebec and the Maritimes. And of course, we have a few offloading points for small quantities in Burrard Inlet. But here we are, Canada, 1980, 79, 80. We don't have any port where we can import oil, without which we cannot live in the next decade. It's all very well to talk about being self-sufficient by 1990. How many people actually try to conserve energy or light or power or natural gas or anything else as long as they know they can reasonably expect to pay the bill at the end of the month? Nobody does. I went out myself the other day and bought myself a new car, first car I bought in a long while. And what did old idiot Webster do? He bought a 6-cylinder vehicle. You know, I should have been buying a one-stroke motorbike if I was serious about conserving energy. And the other points that he made, good points indeed, that people like John Fraser are just dogging it and following along with the I, of course, am totally sold off all these environmental people right now. I'm sick and tired of these Spatsisi Greenpeace people and all the rest of it. You know, they've overdone and they've oversold their case, but the media is still hog-tied with Greenpeace. And the politicians are still hog-tied. We got to live in today's world, and as Williston said, you got to get up in the morning. You got to have people employed. You got to have oil for your operations. Without your oil, we would face the most incredible social disruptions that could possibly imagine. And for those people who talk about solar power and energy and wind and wave power, that's 100 years down the road, I think, quite honestly. And the other point with Prime Minister Clark formulating his oil policy, and this incredible man Lougheed in Alberta, is who decides what oil will go where in the future? As you know, one of the basic problems with Lougheed's oil policy is that he's quite willing to let the multinational oil companies make all the money they want, and perhaps agree to the federal government taxing back windfall profits. In fact, we've got, so that there's money available to develop, I think it's the Cold Lake and the heavy oil at Cold Lake and the Athabascan tar sands. But you can bet your bottom dollar that the multinationals will play fast and loose with their assets in this country. We can't keep their money in this country except for a 15% withholding tax. And when we put up the price of oil to world levels in Canada, think of the money the multinationals are going to make. And the policy is supposed to be that that money will go back into the ground for development. Will it? Will it blazes? Only if it suits the multinationals to do it. And we don't yet have a federal government which is strong enough to say, this will be the oil policy, this will be the conservation, this will be the distribution. And Williston's very well taken point is that when you only get 25% of your oil from within British Columbia, and we're selling wheat or we're selling lumber or whatever, we must be in a position to import oil for the foreseeable future. I don't see much. You see, just that one last point. In wartime, politicians make decisions for national security and the national good. In peacetime, they don't have the guts to do it. I'm not going to take phone calls at the moment. I'm going to give you Brian's piece right now on Matsqui. The guy goes out and does a hard day's work yesterday. I've got to use it today. Hit me over the head with an old empty film can. Brian at Matsqui after the break. You do it. I'm off. Brian will intro it. I'm out of the set.
Takes too long to get out of it, huh? 13, 14. Yeah, test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So as far as I can count. Jack, you might remember that sad story we did about the Birdman of William Head, Frank Schlosser, and what happened to him. Well, this is the place that he first visited, 1966. He was the first inmate at Matsqui Prison. We went there yesterday. The way Frank got there, he got off the bus and ran to be the first inmate. Consider being in prison, the prospect of a lengthy sentence to serve and all that free time with nothing to do. It's a thought that faces every one of the 8,000 inmates in the federal prison system daily. And this is one of those prisons, Matsqui Medium Security, an institution that was originally built as a drug treatment center. It's the largest population-wise in BC. The 321 inmates are rated non-violent, although there are murderers among them, and on occasion there have been acts of violence within these confines. But what helps to make this lockup a more bearable place to be are its prison programs. And Director Dave Dhillon boasts of a low unemployment level. Is it a matter of choice for the inmates in terms of what they do? Can they sit idly by if they want to?
It's not a matter of choice, it's a question of opportunities provided to the inmate population. And most of them have voluntarily accepted the work assignments and the other program areas, and the attendance rate in all programs, including social development areas and the work areas, is fairly good.
This would, of course, add to their parole prospects, I suppose.
Certainly, you know, the earned remission, which they get time off, temporary absences for different programs, meeting their families. The inmate pay, daily pay, is directly tied down to the daily work, and those who don't work, they don't get paid. So basically, it's the unemployment rate is pretty low in the total institution.
11 inmates are enrolled in the automotive program. Some hope to eventually become journeyman mechanics. The cars and trucks they practice on belong to staff members. They pay for the parts and a minimal charge for labor.
That engine there, when it's finished, will probably cost him around $450 to $500.
On the outside?
Well, we're looking at $1,000 to $1,500.
So it's about a third the cost.
It's at least, yeah, about that, yeah.
Inmates in here, can they get a complete mechanical certificate, get their journeyman's papers?
They can if they have enough time. Right now we're doing a pre-apprenticeship program which lasts about 10 months. And if they want to stay a little longer, let's say they stayed 4 or 5 years, in that time he could write for his technical qualification at the end of that time.
And what's his success ratio been on the outside?
Oh, it's been very good, very good. I have a couple of men that have their own business here in the local area. We're quite proud of that.
They met here and started their own business when they got out.
That's right.
The modular home shop is unique to this prison. A double-sided unit is built here every month, a half unit every 2 weeks. Roger Lalonde and George Marion are 2 inmates new to the program.
Like I said, it's good practical experience. If somebody wants to give you a try at it when you get on the street, it'd be helpful to have this background.
Help take away some of the boredom?
Pardon me?
Does it take away some of the boredom of the place? Or?
Yeah, it does, yeah. No, it's experience.
Jim, who are the customers?
The Indian Affairs, the Indian bands all across BC.
Going to remote areas mostly, or?
Well, as far north, we've gone as far north as up to Yellowhead so far, and a lot of it in the lower mainland right now, too.
Yeah, any plans to expand that into new areas other than Indian Affairs?
Well, right at the present time, the need in the Indian Affairs is going to keep us busy just dealing with them, so we're not really concerned about other areas right at the present time until we get caught up with the Indian Affairs.
It costs somewhere in the vicinity of about $14,000 to pay for the materials for this double-sided modular home. Add to that about $3,000 in labor costs that Matsqui Institution charges, and you've got a modular home for $17,000. If you produce the same home in the private sector, it would cost about double that. Perhaps the most unique program at Matsqui is its university degree plan. And this is Matsqui U, a university arts course that is working in conjunction with the University of Victoria. Most of the 60 inmates enrolled have never completed high school, yet some of them have already graduated with a BA and are waiting to get out to use it. Bob Andrews is in first year. He's serving time for robbery. Keith Wetson is in third year. He's in for several escapes. And Doug McMorland, in for drug trafficking, is in fourth year.
I'm doing 15 years and I have 18 months in. So I could get out anywhere from 3.5 years to 10 years.
And you, Keith, how about yourself?
A 12-year sentence. I've got approximately 4 years of it in. I'm eligible for parole in another year. I see my likelihood of the parole is possibly within another 2 or 3 years, closer to the end of my sentence. At that time, I've got intentions of going on to do a master's degree in social work.
And what more do you have to do here? You're in your
Well,
third year?
I'm in my third year here. I could complete the next year by the spring, or depending on how I stretch it out. I mean, it's to my advantage, I think, now to become concerned about quality and not quantity in my education. Take my time.
Doug, what year are you in?
I'm in my fourth year, and I'm doing 6 years right now. I'm eligible for parole right at the present time, but it's looking at the if the parole board looks at my plans as being realistic.
What are your plans?
Well, I was going to go on to take a Bachelor of Arts degree in education and go on to take an MA in education. I'm majoring right now in psychology.
Is one of the big problems here then that the fact that, okay, you get your degree and there may be 5, 6, 7 years before you're released? What do you do in between?
That's the way I look at it. I know in the institution there is, or I have known since I've been here, 4 or 5 different people that have gotten their BAs and they're still in here.
We don't do this for parole. I mean, you may start doing this for parole, this program, right? And I think that after a very brief period, men come to the realization that this program and a BA and a parole don't go necessarily hand in hand. I mean, facts are hard to argue with. And we do it for the sense of the education for its own sake, because it is a very fulfilling education, and it's something that there's nothing of that nature here that we could possibly do, you know. I mean, we come in here, I mean, Bob knows this from himself, we come here to this program and we see men that we've known for a number of years, and we see them after a 5-year span or whatever you see this, and they are changed men. They have greatly enriched their lives.
They're looking at your past record, police reports, not what you've done positively.
Do you think you should be given an age?
Why are we containing men for long, long terms in penitentiaries? They're going to be released back into society. A BA does not teach you or give you a skill that you're going to earn a living with. It teaches you how to live, and that's what we should be concerned with.
Like any other medium security prison, Matsqui has dorm-style living, and inmates can pretty well move about at will on the inside. Director Dhillon has been here for a year, but his predecessors remember that the prison was originally planned in 1966 as a drug treatment center. That experience failed miserably, and the addicts were shipped out. This institution first opened as a drug treatment center. Any problem with drugs now?
Question of using, or the question of... No, you have some odd individual who is certainly still an addict and will try to acquire drugs to use them. But our security systems are fairly good to control, but the total control is you cannot have it in medium security institutions. The inmates going on temporary absences, the open visits, open houses once a month. We're fairly liberal in approach in the program areas. So to control 100% of the drugs, I think it's an impossible task, but certainly we minimize to a degree where we haven't, with our intelligence, too much problem of controlling drugs, or inmates using drugs.
The Inmates Committee president is Earl Noble. The man on his right is Rick Rye, the committee secretary.
Well, there are a few, but you will have a few problems in any institution. I think the biggest problem that the inmates of Matsqui have right now, or where they would like their views expressed through us, are skin frisking of our visitors when they come to visit Matsqui.
We're talking about every type of visitor?
Well, not so much the male, because the males don't seem to go through as many skin frisks as the females are subjected to.
The women?
Yeah.
Why is this happening? Is this something unusual?
Well, there are more females visiting, like their husbands or friends or whatever over here than males.
If somebody doesn't like somebody, and you know, they can put in their note to these guys saying so-and-so might be bringing some drugs in, so then they frisk them for that reason, I guess, whether they're bringing it or not.
I don't think it's an increased number. I think depending on the information which we do get, we might have done it more times than usual. But it's a routine thing. If we get the information, I think we'll be unwise to, not to act upon the information. It's better to be preventive, than to, suffer the consequences after if all kinds of drugs are available.
Is it strictly women being searched?
No, both sexes.
Skin frisks for both?
I don't know what you mean by the skin frisk. Basically, it's a body search, which is without clothes.
On a whole, other than the frisking problems you've been having, am I correct in assuming things seem to be not that bad here?
Well, things are
as far as institutions are concerned.
This is not I don't think it ever has been a problem institution.
Tika Isab. Yeah. Brian has a great knack of showing both sides of a story like that. You know, it's really quite impressive to see the university program, to see the modular homes, see the guys getting some experience, to hear about the fella saying his BA is to learn how to live. I wish a lot of the UBC students who rushed out in the 60s to get these useless BAs had realized that. Useless in terms of going out to look for a job with them, BA in anthropology, or a BA in this, that, or the next thing. A BA in, I think you used to call it BA in grass weaving, or in ceramics. Basket weaving, that's what I was looking for. Thank you for the voice off camera. The other funny thing there was just now, was when they finished the last segment and they put up the freeze frame, as we call it in the business, of the gates at Matsqui with call Webster. It did not mean call Webster if you want to get in to Matsqui, or call Webster if you want to get out of Matsqui, or call Webster if you want to buy a modular home. They go to the reserves. Or call Webster if you object to skin frisks. You just meant call Webster on a free-for-all from now. I'm going to have somebody drop in from the YM or YW? Housing Registry, W. Just for a few minutes. We've got some great emergency on. So we're going to have a free-for-all. I'm still impressed by what Williston said to me. Something else I wanted to say, you know. I am not a Doug Collins. Don't even like the fellow. But I must say I was very pleased to see, you know, judges have good decisions and they have bad decisions. When Mr. Justice F.C. Craig Monroe handed down the decision on the Birdman cartoon, I thought, with all due respect, Your Lordship, you're wrong. But when he handed down the decision yesterday saying ICBC was entitled to cancel the house insurance of a guy involved in the drug trade, I said to myself, Mr. Justice Craig Monroe, you made the right decision. That was good. And I laughed myself silly last night when I saw some NDP MP from the East. Is that standing by? I'll keep that until I get this little bit of film standing by, because I know a number of people who were laughing them silly last night when they saw this particular clip out of the House of Commons from, I think his name was Miller of the NDP, when he got up and asked, can I say the following question yet?
Can you say it yet? No, no.
Can't say it yet. Can't say it yet. That guy walking across the back of the set there, he's gone to see if the film is up. Not to worry about that. I'm kind of stuck. I'll go to the phones in the meantime. I'd forgotten about the telephones. You know, once I get gabbing to myself, you know, put a camera in front of me and I'll give you a song and dance any day of the week. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack.
Morning.
You're no relation to Gabby Hayes, I trust.
Well, all I need is my beard back again. Oh, and the bumper today, I want you to show that shot. Bring it over to me. Or is it nailed to the wall? Nailed to the wall. I want you to show the shot of Webster with the, when I was young and handsome with my Hemingway beard. No, I'm not Gabby Hayes. Go ahead, please. I'll show it right now. Don't go away.
No, no.
I'm in a skittish mood. I don't know why I'm in a skittish mood. How's that for a handsome chap? See how thin I think I'm better looking now without a beard. My wife was right. Margaret, you were right. I will not grow it again. Okay, what did you want to say, Gabby?
Jack, please consider showing a recap of your interview with Mr. Williston on the weekend for the benefit of the people who weren't
You mean the best of Webster?
today.
Not a bad idea.
Mr. Williston's approach and insight into the situation is the most sensible that I've seen and read about or heard about in many, many years. And I think his solution, or his possible solution for the problem is damn near genius.
His common sense.
Yes.
It's quite astonishing, you know, when you realize that we're at the mercy of the national oil distribution when 75% of our oil comes from Alberta.
No, I think his...
Well, not 75%, maybe 50.
I think his idea for an oil port at Kitimat is the answer that we've been looking for a long time.
But as he said, and I said even more bluntly, everybody's scared witless of a few hairy-headed ecologists.
Well, let's hope some government officials are tuned in this morning.
I think it's good for Williston to speak out. At least he's not running for office and he can afford to speak out. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was going to come up with the same thing, Jack. As I might mention, Governor Brown of California talked about an oil exchange. This is Alberta oil going to the United States, and Alberta receiving oil from Alaska. Mexican oil going to the United States rather than Europe, Alaska oil going to Japan.
Yes, I know that.
All this transportation costs, right?
Yeah.
That's oil goes to Alberta, Alberta oil goes to the United States. What's wrong with exchange?
Nothing's wrong with it.
But no one talks about it, you know. There's a tremendous, horrendous cost if you're going to transport it. I don't like Douglas Channel idea. I think I'd rather have it go through Washington State and back up to Canada rather than come down that way.
It's a lot shorter to ship it from Valdez. Oh, and don't forget, he's talking too about oil from China and oil from Venezuela coming into Kitimat for Canadian
no one's
usage.
talking about this 500 million barrels in Venezuela anymore, are they?
Well, they're now talking about putting a pipeline up the west coast of, is it the west coast? The west coast of South America.
I'm surprised that you didn't know we didn't have a refinery on port.
No, I know about the refineries, but we don't have a major supertanker oil port anywhere in Canada.
No, well, didn't Irwin build one in Newfoundland? Of course
No, it's not a big one.
No, not a big one, eh?
Well, good point. Hold on a second, please. Go ahead from Duncan. Nelson.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning in Nelson.
Yes. As a side note to Williston's comment on oil slicks, which I found very interesting concerning the U-boats in World War II, in a book written by Bern Keating on the Inside Passage, he comments on reports from Captain Cook's journal about descriptions of oil slicks off of Port Concepcion.
Port which?
Port Concepcion near Santa Barbara.
Oh, yeah, Santa Barbara, California.
Which would infer that oil slicks have happened in many centuries before ours.
Oh, yeah, they've been pouring out the bottom of the sea for thousands of generations.
And
no doubt
I
about
wish
that.
you weren't quite so hard on environmentalists. They might turn you off, and they've got lots to learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Powell River, go ahead, please.
Hello there.
Hello there.
Yes, I was interested when you were talking to Mr. Willis earlier this morning, because where I live, there's a proposal for a pipeline that's going through, that may go through, if West Coast Transmission has its way.
Which pipeline is that?
It's from Williams Lake over the coastal mountains that goes across the strait, laid underwater, to Comox, distribution to Vancouver Island.
You're talking about natural gas pipeline?
Yep.
That's right. That is still on the cards. As a matter of fact, I think provincial government made some noises about that last week, that it's essential to get some of our natural gas into Vancouver Island to cut down on the use of oil.
Yes, BC Hydro has a competing proposal, which it costs less, though I can't figure out why, because it goes across the strait, where the strait is quite a bit wider than up here. Why do you think this is?
Don't know. I remember there was a fuss about 10 years ago about a natural gas pipeline going across from Powell River to Vancouver Island, somewhere near where? Comox?
Yes, it goes across, yeah.
What's wrong with that?
Well, I don't know. I really don't. I think it's the stretch over the coastal mountains that has everybody worried.
The one thing we have got in British Columbia is a surplus of natural gas, we are told.
Uh-huh.
And it's a surplus we should preferably use ourselves, except, of course, we get so much money from selling it to the U.S. through the National Energy Board.
Well, weren't there big noises the provincial government was making about...
There's an inquiry going on just now, the Bates inquiry, and the NDP have guaranteed an absolute moratorium on uranium. That's in BC. They don't say the same in Manitoba. Bennett's waiting for his particular results before he makes a policy on uranium. But, you know, I'm inclined to go along, and I hate to say this because my daughter in Kamloops will hate me for it. The day may come, 25, 50 years down the road, when the only kind of power we might have is nuclear.
What about hydroelectric power?
Well, hydroelectric ain't going to be enough.
I thought there was a big surplus of...
There's a surplus in British Columbia, and the BC Hydro is accused of creating a surplus for the purpose of export. But as the population grows, I don't think you can say there's going to be an export of a surplus of hydropower in North America. Because we're all one big happy family when it comes down to the final crunch if the security of the United States or the economy of the United States is threatened. I mean, they're being very quiet on Iran at the moment for obvious reasons. They want to save the 50 Americans. But there is no more imperialist nation than the United States when it comes down to the final clunk. Whether the lights go out in Detroit and Los Angeles, we can't expect to sit up on the tops of surplus power here of any kind and not share it with the Americans.
We may become a state sooner than we think if...
Sooner than we think. It's one day, I'm not trying to create alarm and despondency, but the national interests of the United States are the paramount decisions on which they make their policies. in the final analysis. They're about as democratic as the old British Empire when it was at its finest, or its worst. Okay, after the break. After the break. They're not mine. We'll keep our cigarettes there. Regular viewers to Webster will know that I have a somewhat twisted sense of humor. And last night I was watching NewsHour, and I watched a question from an NDP MP about compensation for herring fishermen, and I nearly burst a gut, if not my roll, while laughing. Watch this. Just watch.
In view of the fact that the policy of the minister in the raw herring industry in British Columbia will result in the loss of 800 to 1,000 jobs in that industry, and in view of the fact that the minister has guaranteed that in the Atlantic industry, bona fide salmon industry fishermen will maintain their jobs. My question is, will the minister guarantee the same rights to the bona fide fishermen in the British Columbia herring industry, and will the minister assure us that those moonlighters that have been in the industry will be curtailed just as they will be in the Atlantic coast?
He's asking for two things: compensation for herring fishermen on the west coast, with the announcement of reductions in some of the catches. Northern area goes down to 4,000 metric tons, and also to get the moonlighters out of the industry. What a dreamer he is. And that any herring fisherman should ask for compensation, no matter what they're getting on the Atlantic seaboard, for their salmon cutbacks, is really quite comical. I hate to think of the amount of money that wasn't reported to the income tax last year by the herring fishermen who made the killings with the cash buyers from Japan and elsewhere last year. I heard some stories in the Gulf Islands which happened to real people which would make a hair stand on end, as the herring fishermen gleefully, if you gave them permission, they'd be out and they'd take every herring roe out of that Gulf of Georgia, the west coast of Vancouver Island, even if there wasn't going to be one damn herring there next year. And to ask Ted Miller of Nanaimo, Alberni, of course, is doing his duty. He comes from a fishing area when he wants compensation for herring fishermen. My goodness gracious me, the money that was made in the herring fishery at between $3,000 and $5,000 a ton last year was enough to pay the national debt. I know people that went out in a couple of days off from working on the BC ferries and came home with thousands of dollars stuffed in their jeans. I trust it was all reported to the income tax. Just had to say that little piece. Make friends and influence people. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack. A very good and interesting program this morning.
Thank you.
And, you know that today in British Columbia, we've got the economy turning around from the disaster in 72 to 75. And I'm want to refer to Mr. Williston's comments there. I'm a concerned oil user, and you know as well as I do that when the oil man comes and puts 600 gallons of oil in your tank, it's quite a bill. That's 62.5 cents a gallon now.
$360.
Yeah, all of a sudden, see?
Now
and
it's going to go.
You gotta have it.
Going to go up higher.
Yeah. So, you know that what Mr. Williston was talking about, and I think he's a fairly well knowledgeable man in British Columbia.
He wasn't talking about price. He's talking about world market prices if you bring stuff in from Venezuela and from China.
Yeah. Well, we've got to wake up in British Columbia and not listen to a lot of negative stuff, because the facts are facts, and the fact that the right-of-way from Kitimat to the interior is already there in the way of a gas line, so there's no other problem there than to put the oil line alongside it and have it done very quickly and as cheap as it can be done.
The other point he made was about the 3 refineries, Prince George, Fort St. John, and then the connection from Fairmont to Kamloops.
Jobs, you know, Jack, and unless we get with it, you know, we're going to go back instead of going ahead.
Here, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Yes, I'm not talking about oil. I just want to get your advice up here. And I was involved in a car accident this morning with a police officer, eh?
I didn't hear a word you said. You're mumbling. Just speak more clearly.
Yes, I was involved this morning in a car accident.
You were involved in a car accident?
Yes, with a police officer.
Was the police officer driving the other car?
Right.
Well, I mean, what can I do about it?
No, well, he rear-ended me, eh?
He rear-ended you?
Yes. So I was just wondering what's going to happen to that police officer.
Nothing. Policemen are entitled to make mistakes, to rear-end you. You'll go along to ICBC. ICBC will say it's his fault. Your damage will be fixed on his insurance, and that's it. Same as happened to anybody else.
Oh, I see.
Nothing to worry about. Don't look for conspiracies. Salmon Nam.
Hello?
I'll tell you how Linda and I communicate someday, so that I know where the calls are coming from.
It's Summerland.
Got it.
Hello, Jack?
Go ahead from Summerland.
Hello. Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Look at this Mr. Williston was talking to this morning about energy. I wonder if anybody in this country knows which portion of our oil is used for domestic and commercial heating, and which portion is used for diesel trains. You know, there's got to be a mental block in this country or something, or the politicians get no guts, because nobody will come out now and tell the people in this country that for the things I just mentioned, domestic heating and so on, why don't we get back to coal, just plain old coal, not having to convert it into oil or gas, just use it for coal. Right now in the province of BC, I've just moved from Alberta, by the way, the people right here are starting to burn wood, some people, and in Alberta, about 4 years ago, I converted my house over to gas, and my fuel bill jumped up from $80 a year to $112 a month.
Where was that?
That was in Alberta.
Yeah, and it was cheap in Alberta at one time.
Yes, well, this was 4 years ago. I built this other house.
$112 a month? Well, mind you, you've got an Alberta winter. What do you expect?
With an automatic stoker, Jack, on coal, it was $80 a year.
Well, despite the fact that I tend to knock the environmental groups, I remember well when great industrial nations burned nothing but coal, and with the fogs in winter time where you could not see your finger in front of your nose.
Well,
not like that, you couldn't.
Well, Jack...
And the filth and the smell and the dirt and the lung disease and the sulfur was abominable. I don't think we'll go back to ordinary coal heating from the anti-pollution point of view. There may be other ways to convert the coal to gas or for some kind of thermal
Jack,
supply.
the way to do it... I can't tell when you were talking.
Oh, okay, you're talking now.
I can't... the way to do it is to use this coal to make hot water or steam heating, mostly hot water heating. And they talk about coal, but ashes from coal. If you ever see the big power plants now, like Wabnam and these ones that are generating electricity, you can't see a thing coming out of the stacks. There's nothing comes out of them now.
Yeah, I know, but that's okay, but that ain't the same as your kitchen fire anyway, I'll tell you that.
No, but when you put in 2 rows of houses in a building site in here, why don't they put in hot water heating and one plant to heat the whole thing?
Good idea, sir. Much obliged. Thank you very much. Take a break. Where is it? It's not there. Didn't work. Kitimat, go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes. Oh, no, just wrong one. Kitimat, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Gee, I'm sure glad to hear you talking about us up here in North Country.
Yeah, we want to put an oil port up there.
Oh, I hope so. We get something up here pretty quick. I know that with Mr. Williston on there, I really took interest. I can't say I have time to listen to your program every morning, but this morning I happen to have the television on. I've been glued to the set ever since. I find that with him talking about this oil part and everything, he makes a lot of good sense. And I know that up here, our elected officials, both municipal and regional, have been talking to just about anybody who will listen for the last few years, as far as I can remember, about some kind of port development, whether it be oil port or wheat port, or because I know you know the situation with the wheat and everything else as well. And so far, everything seems to be you're talking to a political brick wall.
Listen, from what I remember about the oil ports inquiry, there was all kinds of screaming and ranting and raving that you couldn't possibly have an oil port in Kitimat, that it was a narrow, dangerous channel, pollution, nobody in Kitimat wanted it, the fishermen were going to block Douglas Channel with their boats and all that garbage.
Yeah, I think most of the people that were in it, well, I won't say most, but quite a few of the people involved with that weren't even from Kitimat.
Oh, I know that. They descend on these inquiries like leeches.
Exactly how I feel. And I know that, they're talking about oil tankers coming up and down the channel. Okay, right now, every week we have barges loaded with gas and oil for the North to come in here and unload, and have been doing so for over the last 20 years.
Do you work in Alcan?
Hmm?
Do you work in Alcan?
I don't work in Alcan. I work in we have businesses of our own, interests of our own in town, and I'm just a very concerned citizen for Kitimat and for Canada.
Well,
as a
kindly
whole.
in future, if you watch this program regularly, instead of switching on by accident, you'll learn a lot more of what's happening in the outside world.
Well, I like to think I keep...
How deep is the snow in Kitimat so far?
Oh, we're lucky. We only got about 8 inches now, but it's snowing rather constantly all the time since the 1st of December.
Catch me a big salmon in the spring. I'm glad you watched and I'm glad you called.
Okay.
Get your wife out of bed so she can watch too in future.
Fantastic.
Okay. Terrace, go ahead, please.
Oh, yes, sir. I guess I'm on the other side of the coin. I'm one of those eco-freaks that you're talking about, and it's really a shame that you've taken such a strong position against people who are concerned about the environment, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm an upstanding citizen who's concerned not for many, many years about a lot of things that have gone on in this province. The Fraser River Delta is a good example of the kind of things that a lot of us are alarmed over, and anyway, I'll just...
I'm all for any reasonable or even unreasonable conservation, anti-pollution devices, make industry clean and all the rest of it. But what Williston is telling you this morning, and what I subscribe to, and I know that I've always subscribed to it, is that we live with the facts of life, that we cannot convert this society into an oilless society, that Canada is a country which is exceedingly vulnerable despite our own supplies, and that one of these days when the oil begins to be in non-supply, the panic will be in and we'll have no place to bring it in under our own control.
Well, that's fair enough, but I think you've only presented one side of the coin. We do have...
Listen, you get enough of the eco-freaks coming out your ears on radio, television, and newspapers. I don't have to bend over backwards.
Don't tar and feather everybody that way, please, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to associate myself with the Greenpeace actions, and yet I have some very, very sincere concerns that I believe are just as important as some of the things...
And I do respect them, and I mean, tankers should be double-bottomed, and there should be proper control of the traffic, whatever it is, and it shouldn't come through the
streets. A couple points here, because it's very important. First off, Ray Williston does not know this area, otherwise he wouldn't have made some of the statements he did. Major fish runs will be affected by the construction of this pipeline, and contrary to a number of opinions and people that aren't aware of this so-called transportation corridor through the Ziometes River Valley or Copper River Valley, that valley cannot handle another pipeline such as an oil pipeline. It's simply not, the valley is too steep, and very severe environmental damage will undoubtedly take place. Because the oil company says that that's the easiest and the cheapest route to put an oil pipeline through to Edmonton, does not necessarily mean it's true or right. And the fact is that we got some of the largest salmon populations in the Skeena drainage could be affected by the construction of the pipeline itself. And many pipeline breaks have taken place in North America, and it's something that people don't talk about very often. But for example, we had a major one on the Athabasca River a number of years ago. And the same sort of thing could happen in the Lake Else, lake drainage. It could affect the largest population.
Okay, I've got to let you go now, but let me make one point. If in the final analysis it comes to surviving with oil or doing without fish, you can guess which will go down the tube. It won't be the oil.
Talk about practical discussions and logical discussions. Ray Williston and yourself have taken a position that Kitimat is the only place to have an oil port. You're not looking at all of the alternatives that are available, and all I'm asking for is that sensible and logical discussion.
Okay, sir, best I can do for you. Webster after the break. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Morning. Morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Clear as a bell. Yes, do speak up, madam.
Can you hear me?
Yes, madam.
On Mr. Williston's talk this morning, if he's connected with Columbia Cell in any way. I was recently in Rupert, drove out around Talagoff Creek, and was appalled at the devastation of the country by a cellulose company that there's no curtailment on at all. Also, on his oil tankers, if they come down the inland passengers through Hecate Straits, it's the worst weather in the world. It was mentioned that the submarines came into the east coast of these states, and certainly they would be vulnerable on that portion of the sea in the Rupert and Kitimat area. Portland Canal, they would have no maneuverability at all. Also, the terrain behind that area, if you've ever flown over it, is appalling.
Ma'am, every place has the worst weather in the world. Every part of every high sea has the worst weather in the world.
I think maybe Mr. Williston has not been in Hecate Straits.
I've been in Hecate Straits. I've been in the Gulf of Alaska. I've been in the Pentland Firth. I've been in the North Sea. I've been in the North Atlantic. I've been in the South Atlantic, and they're all abysmally, horribly dangerous places in bad weather.
Right.
And so far, we've managed to sail ships with reasonable success throughout the world. He makes another point, though, that the eco people have caused great hysteria over the lengthy damage by the Torrey Canyons of the world, and he says it hasn't happened. But I do appreciate your concern. Ma'am, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack. This is John Rivard, the Executive Director from Native Brotherhood of BC.
Hello, John.
How are you?
Good.
We had Dr. Patrick Moore over last Friday at our convention in Campbell River,
Yeah.
stating his views on that herring roe fishery. As you know, there were some press releases.
And I hope you gave him the boots.
Well, I don't know if we gave him the boots or not, but however, regarding that herring roe fisheries, you had mentioned there was a fellow on there, an MP, with regard to ending
Compensation, yeah.
stating the fact of getting the moonlighters out of the business.
But he also wanted compensation for the other herring fishermen, I think.
Well,
We made lots on the herring last year, John.
Yeah, I know last year we had problems in our central area where lots of our fishermen didn't even get a chance to dip their net because of the...
Oh, you're talking about the north central area.
And
I'm not aware of the details on that. John, I'm going to have to take you another time. Take John's number, would you please, Linda, because I'm just going to a break to finish up the program. Don't go away, John. Hold on. He's on 4, Linda, after the break.
Say we'll be talking about the ward system because
Will we?
yeah, somebody will be coming on, but I don't know who yet.
Turn up that was supposed to turn up, from YMCA.
No,
YW.
They
no,
double-crossed us.
No, she's just stupid.
You speak first.
Tomorrow we have hopefully somebody speaking on the Judge Eckhart's report on the ward system. So it'll be somebody from City Hall here tomorrow.
I read the report. It's not that bad, you know, despite what these people were screaming about yesterday. And other things.
A few other things.
A few other things, for sure. Tomorrow with Webster, 9 a.m. precisely.